A couple of years ago, a workmate and I decided to make our own graphic novel. He was an aspiring writer and I was an aspiring artist, so it was a match made in heaven. We'd get together and I'd look over his script and he looked over my concept art. We were both really excited and I was filled with motivation whenever I left his house to go and work on the comic. I'd imagine the book in my hands and maybe even getting it published like at Image or something, and who knows, maybe Netflix catches wind of it and suddenly there's a hit TV series. The script morphed and changed over time because we were both learning while we were creating. It got to the point where I was learning so much that all the work that I had done up until that point looked bad. It was weird. It looked great while I was doing it, but then just a couple of months later, it would look really amateurish and, well, crap. So I sat down with my mate and I said that I wanted to start again. Because my skills were developing, I felt confident that I could do a better job if I restarted, and I felt that the script deserved better visuals. He, as ever, was really supportive, and so I started again. I also suggested that we start a Patreon page and try and drum up some fan support. This was mostly friends and family, but it meant that I could gather some funds together so that I could have enough to print out some 20-page issues. That way we could have a tangible book that we could potentially sell while we were making the larger graphic novel, and then we could combine those issues into one large graphic novel later on down the line. But I got to the end of issue 2 and I started looking at issue 1 again. The artwork was bad. The storytelling was bad. It was confusing, it was too small in some places, the lettering choices were really ill thought out, and the whole thing just looked completely amateurish. Those feelings from before started bubbling up again. I had learnt so much up until this point that I felt I should really start again, because I felt that the script deserved it. So I sat down with my mate once more and explained. And because of his eternal patience for me, he was really understanding, so I started again. This was around the time that I was just starting my university degree in comics, which was about 3 years ago. At this point, the comic that I was so buzzed about started to feel like an albatross, and it was really weighing me down. So I had one final chat with my mate and I explained that I couldn't fit the comic into my schedule anymore. University projects were piling up and I just didn't have the time to do the comic, let alone do it well. I am lucky to have a friend who is so understanding. Don't get me wrong, life was getting in the way of the project anyway, so it kind of felt like an inevitability that we wouldn't see it through to completion. But if I were talking to the past me now, I would offer some sage advice that would save the project and allow us to see it through to completion. And that's what this video is about. For anyone else who has had a similar experience or fears going through that experience, then watch till the end, because this video will save you a lot of heartache further along down the road. There's a lot that goes into making comics, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to boil it down into 2 things: planning and motivation. I'm going to focus on the latter because I've got more things to say about planning, which will be in another video. There are 9 types of motivation and they fall into 2 categories. 6 of them are intrinsic or come from within, and 3 of them are extrinsic, which come from the outside. For me, I had both. I was intrinsically motivated because I wanted to be a good comic artist, I wanted to express myself, and I wanted to achieve something profound. And I was extrinsically motivated because not only did I not want to let my mate down, but I had put together some social media profiles about the comic as well. The problem that I had was that my focus was all over the place. I spent too much time thinking about social media followings and potential merchandise and potential sales for the comic that I started to put more time and energy into that than what really mattered, which was the comic. And that's what makes motivation quite a dangerous drug sometimes. It's useful to get you going and, more importantly, keep you going, but it can also distract away from the things that matter the most. So based on that, I'm going to pretend that I'm talking to my past self, which to be honest I do in a lot of my videos, and steer myself in the right direction. Before I do anything else, I need to separate what's pragmatic and what's ambitious. My ego was even more fragile then than it is now, and so I wanted to draw the best possible illustration for each and every panel. I had a semi-realistic style because I was learning via YouTube on channels like Proco, and so I tied myself to a particular set of rules. I wanted to evoke realism, and that was my first error. I wasn't knowledgeable or skilled enough to reliably pull that style off in a comic book, and so I should have chosen a more cartoony or expressive style. It would have been less stressful, more creative, and to be honest, more fun if I'd chosen that. I also should have done way more research than I did. I'm the type of person that prefers to learn by screwing things up myself. Reading books and articles and watching videos like this would have helped a lot, but ultimately I kind of need to make my own mistakes. It's a painful and slow process, but it is what it is. But despite that, I should have looked into the printing side a lot more. I should have tried to understand what bleed was because I had no idea how important it was when printing your comics. I also should have realized that just because I can zoom in really close on Photoshop doesn't mean that when it's printed, people are actually going to see those details. It got to the point where I was drawing the eyelids on characters who were way off in the background, and when it printed, you couldn't see that at all. It just looked like a mess. True story. Now, that's not to say that I did everything wrong. I actually think that breaking up the story into smaller sections or smaller issues was a smart idea. It meant that I had smaller achievable goals along the way as opposed to one giant goal a year or more away. So I'd say, good job, past me. That was smart. So if you're new to making comics, make your first comic short, or at the very least split your big ambitious project into smaller attainable goals. That way you can tick off each issue or each section, chapter, whatever, and get that sweet, sweet dopamine hit. And that's one of the reasons why webcomics may actually be the better option for you if you're just coming into this. But again, that's another video for another time. Another thing I did right was working in public. By announcing the project online and creating those social media profiles, I was adding some stakes to the comic. And with that comes pressure, but it was the right kind of pressure for me. That may not work out for you, but for me, knowing that if I couldn't be bothered to draw that day, I was not just letting down my mates, but I was letting down everyone who liked the Facebook page or followed the Instagram account. And as I mentioned, the issue that I ran into was that I was starting to get my dopamine hit from the Instagram follower numbers or the Facebook like count, and I wasn't putting enough energy or time into making the actual comic, which was the whole point. If you have a friend or family member who is willing and able to help, then ask them to manage your social media for you so that you can focus on the most important part. I should have done that. There are so many variables when it comes to making comics, and you don't always notice them until you encounter them yourself. I wasn't able to find a video like this when I first started out, and I know it would have helped me, so I hope it's helped you. Just remember that finding the motivation that ignites that fire within you is really important, but keep in mind that you have to keep your excitement in check so that you don't become too distracted. I mean, we're comic book makers at the end of the day, and that's the name of the game. The clout and the fandom and all that potential stuff, that can come later. It's out of your control, but making comics is within your control, so focus on what you can control. So keep it short, keep the style simple, and you'll have a much better chance of actually finishing your projects. And you'll learn so much more by finishing a comic book than by starting the next one. I'm also going to suggest that you pick up Scott McCloud's Making Comics book, because that book in particular really helped me. Other resources like this channel, which you should definitely subscribe to, is a channel called Struthless. Now, there's a good chance you've already heard of him because he's really, really big. But I wanted to point him out anyway, just in case you hadn't, because his channel is going to really help you if you get in your own way a lot and you struggle with starting projects or keeping motivated or anything like that. He talks a lot about mental health, and it's a topic that I'm going to be addressing more on this channel as well, because I don't think it's talked about enough. And also just making videos like this really helped me. So again, I hope it's helped you. I've been Brinkley, have fun drawing, and I'll see you next week.